Well, didn't they, when they were getting ready for the Beijing Olympics, didn't they take people right out of the fields and the rice paddies, bring them to Beijing, put them on bamboo scaffolding, say, here, build this building? They did. I can't imagine going from the rice paddies, seeing telephones, seeing airplanes, seeing giant buildings, skyscrapers, and then the government said, okay, everybody back.
Well, actually, the second part's not right. Then they found other jobs for people. I mean, China,
Okay,
one of the interesting things about China is there's been this huge problem in China, which is you can't raise people's incomes if they stay on the land working as farmers. And so they tried that. There was a very aggressive series of policies about a decade ago to do this. It didn't work. So you've got to move people to cities. So China is going to urbanize 300 million people over the next 15 years. And when you talk about things that could potentially cause instability, right, urbanization, you start packing people into cities.
And because they have the one-child policy and girls are not as good as boys, you've got a lot of men in the population that don't have any chance of getting married.
That's right. So the demographic challenges are also immense. So I think that's internally, the Chinese, precisely because of the history you've just described, are very aware of the risks of instability, much more, I think, than we are in the United States.
Where do you think we're headed? I was talking to somebody and they said, I think we're headed for a world where the China model is the dominant model. That doesn't sound good if you're an American.
No, well, I think a lot of it depends on how you construe. I think the lesson of the world is that an American model, what we used to call the Washington Consensus model, and we had this idea sort of in the 90s that as long as you opened McDonald's and Disneylands everywhere, everybody was going to be like us. That's not the case.
No.
It turns out, incredibly enough, you can live in Tehran and have a cell phone and lipstick and like Britney Spears and still want nuclear weapons, right? That those things are not mutually exclusive. So what we're really heading
The Big
for,
Mac is not enough.
No. The Whopper with cheese, if there's a special on fries.
Well, we're not going to give those to any country.
Then you'll settle for chemical.
Disarm.
Right, chemical weapons. But so what we're entering into is a world that's much more complex than we imagine. The idea that globalization would just sort of make everybody happy, and if you were living in Tashkent, you would feel like you were living in Cleveland, is clearly wrong. So we're dealing with a much more complicated global landscape. I think that creates a sense of urgency in a place like Beijing. I mean, the most shocking thing for me as somebody who lives between Beijing and the United States is when you come back here, there's almost no sense of urgency. I mean, there's very few places here where you find people feeling that. Yeah, and I'll tell you, in Beijing, Beijing is such an exciting city right now. The intellectual life in Beijing is just electric, with people trying to figure out how they're going to manage this tremendous project forward. And they're thinking the unthinkable.
See, we seem to just be, and you tell me, Ben, survivors don't do this. We seem to just be holding on. Just hold on. Just hold on. Don't let it collapse. Just hold on. Survivors say, let the damn thing collapse. Let's go, because that's the exit, or that's the way out, or that's the way to the future. We seem to be hanging on to stuff. Does anybody survive just doing this?
Some people survive just doing that, but it's not a great strategy, because what you need is you need to take action, and you need to have a plan A, and you need to have a plan B. So this applies when your 401k is crashing, or when your plane is crashing, or when you're way behind on your mortgage. People who don't want to face reality just sort of keep going through the motions. They do something known as milling in disaster situations. They kind of look around and see, is anything bad happening? Gather into some information, but they don't take action. And what Joshua's describing that's happening in China, that sense of urgency, people survive when they feel the urgency and when they move toward plan A, and if plan A fails, they take plan B. Urgency is sort of an incredibly important part of survival. People who survive all kinds of challenges feel the urgency, and it's people who just want things to stay the way they are.
I have a minute here, and I want to come to you next, Bruce, and talk a little bit about God. But Joshua says there is no urgency here. I think that's true. We've changed as a culture. Is there a way for the culture to be reinvigorated with that sense of urgency?
Typically, it takes a person in a position of authority, literally a flight attendant, literally Captain Sullenberger, literally a person of power, to tell the 80% of us who don't know what to do, who are bewildered, in a stupor, waiting for someone to tell us which way do we go. It takes a person or a group of people, 10% of us. 10% of us know what to do, 80% of us don't, and then 10% of us do the wrong thing. It needs a group of leaders.
You know, it's fascinating that you. I mean, Bruce, I think you've been very fair to Ben, and He uses George Washington and Sullenberg, but he doesn't use Moses.
The ultimate survivor.
Exactly. Is there a greater survivor than Moses? You know, we need to freshen up your routine.
Hang on
Mr.
just a
Sherman.
second. We'll be back in just a second. If you are somebody that watches this program every night at 5 o'clock, first of all, thank you for that. People ask me all the time, what should I read? Where should I look? How can I improve myself? How can I figure things out? These 3 steps, swear to you, this is the best way to start. These books influenced me in the last year, and I didn't know they were all written by best friends until a few weeks ago. The Age of the Unthinkable, which I talked to you about a year ago. About 8 months ago, I talked to you about the Survivors Club, and then America's Prophet. It is think out of the box, how to survive, and the importance of God. It's amazing because it's step 1, step 2, step 3 on everything we talk about on this program. I want to go to Bruce, who has written America's Prophet, and talk to you about the one thing, and I've used it on the show several times. I don't know if you've seen it, but I've used it on the show
have seen it.
several times. A couple of weeks ago, I used it at CPAC about the Statue of Liberty. Tell quickly the story of what most people don't understand about the Statue of Liberty.
Well, I think to put this into context, the story of America's Prophet is that one story. The Exodus and the story of Moses has inspired generation after generation of Americans, and it comes up in the great symbols of America. What are the great symbols of America? The Liberty Bell. There's a quote from Moses on the side of the Liberty Bell. Proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. The seal. On July 4th, 1776, as you know, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Ben Franklin were asked to come up with a seal. 6 weeks later, they proposed that the seal be Moses leading the Israelites across the Red Sea. Cut 100 years later to maybe the defining symbol of America, the Statue of Liberty. The French wanted to pay tribute to the martyred president and to the American journey of liberty by building a Statue of Liberty. And Frederick Bartholdi picked the Roman goddess of liberty as his model, but he imported 2 symbols from Moses to bring her to life. Number 1, the spikes of light around her head. Number 2, the tablet in her arms. Both of which come from the moment that Moses comes down Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments. Okay? So the heart of the Moses story is this tension between freedom and law, between Moses leads the Israelites out of slavery, they cross the Red Sea, that's a moment of great exhilaration, at which point chaos follows, at which point the commandments are delivered. The message here is that freedom depends on law. The 2 are in tension. If you look at the statue, at the base of her feet are the broken shackles, and in her arms are the tablets. And so that message is what was at the heart of the story. And for all of those millions, tens of millions of immigrants who sailed underneath the Statue of Liberty, they looked up and they saw this familiar beacon that said, this is the new promised land. Now the promised land, and this is the point that you made so passionately at CPAC that got the people, you may be too modest to say it, but people standing on their feet cheering for this point you made at CPAC, was the promised land only works if there's a hard time behind it. Okay? If you're leaving Egypt behind, if you're leaving the moaning, if you open your Bible tonight, the opening sentence of the book of Exodus talks about the Israelites moaning under slavery. That is an uncomfortable, bad place they want to escape to go to the promised land. And this is the point that you've sung across America the last few months. They were leaving Europe, they were leaving something old, and they were coming to the new. And so that is the symbol of the promised land. And that's, I think, another thing that we all have in common here, which is step number 1, imagine a promised land. If you can't imagine a better place to come out of the uncomfortable, oppressed place, you're never going to make it to that better place.
Now, here's the thing that he wrote about, and when we talked about it, he said, well, I didn't really actually see it that way, but...
My wife prefers your interpretation.
Yeah. The famous poem, give me your tired, your weak, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. That's always read tenderly. And as I'm reading your understanding of the Statue of Liberty, I realize that would be more like, oh, Europe, I feel so bad for you. Send all your riffraff over here because you'll never make it with that anchor around your neck. We'll take your tired and your poor and your huddled masses. That's not. It was more of a challenge back to Europe, saying we'll make it with the worst of the worst. I want to give you just a piece of what happened at CPAC, based really on this book. Watch. The statue